Naomi Sutter found the notice nailed to the Ferry Landing door before the sun had fully cleared the ridge, the paper still curling at its edges from the damp morning air. Closed by order of the Territorial Permit Office, it read, the ink heavy and official beneath a wax seal she did not recognize. She pulled the nail free with her bare fingers and stood there a long moment, her father's brass ferry bell cold against her palm where she had carried it out of habit every morning since his funeral. "Your ferry is closed," Victor Pratt said, stepping down from his own gleaming new barge tied up 20 yards along the bank. He said it the way a man says something he has already arranged to be true, smooth and satisfied, his gloved hands folded before him like a preacher delivering unwelcome news he did not truly regret. "On whose authority?" Naomi said, though she already suspected the answer sat somewhere in Pratt's coat pocket. "Mr. Dunlap's office found the channel unsafe for passenger crossing," Pratt said. "Effective this morning." "I'd hate for anyone to get hurt on your father's old rig, Miss Sutter, especially now that mine can carry the traffic properly." A deckhand stood near the ferry's rail, coiling a line with the unhurried patience of a man who had done the same task 1,000 mornings before this one. He said nothing for a long moment, watching Pratt with an expression that gave away considerably less than his eyes actually seemed to be measuring. "That channel's run true for 30 years, the deckhand said finally, his voice low and even. "Might want to check who actually surveyed it before you post a closure over it." Pratt's smile thinned at that, though he recovered it quickly enough. "August here's new to the crossing," he told Naomi, a warning dressed up as helpfulness. "Might not want to trust a hired hand's opinion over an official ruling." Naomi looked at the man called August Reynolds, at the calm, unbothered way he held Pratt's gaze without flinching, and felt something she could not yet name settle uneasily in her chest. "I'm not closing this ferry," she said, loud enough for the small gathering crowd along the bank to hear plainly. "Not on a notice I've never seen a survey to back." Pratt's jaw tightened. "You'll be closing it regardless, Miss Sutter, whether you like the paperwork or not." To understand how Naomi Sutter came to be standing on her own dock arguing with a man who wanted her father's crossing more than he wanted honest competition, it helps to go back 6 weeks, to the ordinary spring morning August Reynolds first walked down to the water asking for work. Fenwick Landing sat where the Talbot River narrowed enough for a proper crossing, the only reliable passage for 40 miles in either direction, and Thaddeus Sutter had run that ferry for 26 years before his heart gave out the previous autumn. Naomi had grown up on the water, had learned to read the river's moods before she'd learned her letters properly, and had taken over the crossing without a moment's hesitation once her father was gone. Though the town's confidence in a woman running the only ferry for a hard-traveling county took longer to earn than the work itself ever had. Her mother had died when Naomi was small, leaving Thaddeus to raise her largely alone between crossings, and he had taught her every practical thing a river operator needed to know, without once suggesting the lessons mattered less because she was his daughter rather than a son. She remembered him showing her, at 9 years old, how to read a coming storm off the color of the western sky, and how to feel, through the pole itself, when the current beneath the ferry had shifted enough to warrant a change of course. She had done it well enough, keeping the schedule reliable through spring floods and low summer water alike, and had built, in 6 months, a reputation nearly as solid as her father's had been across a full quarter-century. Victor Pratt had arrived in Fenwick Landing that same winter, with money from somewhere east and a plan, spoken openly enough at the Mercantile, to build a transport monopoly along the Talbot that would leave no room for a single independent ferry to keep operating. He had tried buying her out first, a fair enough offer on its face, and Naomi had refused it plainly, understanding exactly what her father would have thought of selling 26 years of honest work to a man who intended to raise the fares the moment competition disappeared. Pratt had not argued the refusal directly. He had simply grown friendlier with the territorial permit officer, a tired, easily persuaded man named Elmer Dunlap, and Naomi had begun noticing, through that spring, a particular tightening in the rules governing her own operation that never seemed to trouble Pratt's larger barge in quite the same way. It was into this uneasy season that August Reynolds walked down to the landing one bright morning, asking plainly whether she needed an extra hand, and offering nothing more about himself than a name and a willingness to work. Naomi looked him over the way she looked over every stranger who came asking for work on the river, judging strength and steadiness rather than manners. "Ferry works harder than it looks," she said. "I'll pay fair wages, but you'll earn every cent of them." "Suits me fine," August said, and that was the whole of it. He proved himself within the first week, reading the river's current with an ease that surprised her more than she let show, calling depth changes before the pole even confirmed them, adjusting the ferry's angle against a crosswind with the instinct of a man who had crossed considerably more difficult water than the Talbot in his time. Naomi noticed, too, the small brass instrument he kept wrapped in oilcloth in his coat, taking it out some evenings to check the river's rise against markings only he seemed to understand. He rose before she did most mornings, checking the mooring lines and the ferry's deck for anything the night's weather might have loosened, and worked through the busiest crossing hours without ever once asking for an easier pace than the schedule actually demanded. She noticed, watching him from the small ticket window some afternoons, that he treated every passenger with the same even respect, farmers and merchants alike, never hurrying an elderly rider or fussing over a wealthy one differently than he fussed over anybody else. "That's a fine bit of equipment for a deckhand to be carrying," she said one evening, watching him note something in a small book by lamplight. "Habit from an old job," August said, closing the book without offering more. Never lost the taste for measuring things properly. She let the matter drop, though she found herself turning it over more than once in the weeks that followed. Old Amos Kettering, who ran the mercantile and had known every soul passing through Fenwick Landing for 30 years, mentioned once, offhand, that he'd seen a man built just like August at a territorial hearing in the capital the previous spring, though he couldn't rightly recall the occasion. Naomi filed the observation away the way she filed most small oddities that did not yet demand an explanation. She had considerably more pressing matters occupying her that spring than the private history of one competent deckhand. The days settled into a working rhythm neither of them had planned, August handling the pole and the mooring lines, while Naomi managed the schedule and the fares, and evenings finding them both at her father's old kitchen table going over the ferry's accounts by lamplight. She told him, one night, about the winter her father had taught her to read the river's surface for hidden snags, the particular pattern of ripples that meant trouble beneath a current that looked calm enough on top. She found herself, more evenings than she had planned for, telling him small things about her father she had not spoken aloud to anyone since the funeral, the way he had whistled some tune she never learned the name of while working the pole, the particular gruff tenderness he had shown toward every stray dog that wandered down to the landing looking for scraps. August listened with a stillness that felt like genuine attention rather than mere politeness, asking small questions that suggested he was building an actual picture of the man rather than simply waiting for his turn to speak. "He sounds like he knew this water the way most men know their own hands," August said, and something in his voice carried a genuine respect that Naomi had not expected from a hired hand only weeks into the work. "Better," Naomi said. 26 years of it. I've got maybe a third of what he knew, and I'm still learning the rest from his old logbook most evenings." August's attention sharpened at that, though he said nothing further about it just then. Naomi noticed the shift and set it aside with everything else she had not yet found time to properly examine. Pratt's pressure grew sharper as the weeks wore on. Dunlap's office sending increasingly particular demands, a new inspection here, a fresh fee there, each one landing considerably harder on Naomi's modest operation than it ever seemed to land on Pratt's larger barge. She met each demand as best she could, though the accumulated weight of it left her lying awake some nights, doing arithmetic that never quite balanced the way she needed it to. "You think Dunlap's working for Pratt outright?" August said one evening, watching her frown over the ledger. "I think a man doesn't inspect my mooring lines twice in 1 month without somebody paying him to find a reason," Naomi said. "Can't prove it, though. Dunlap's careful enough to keep his own hands clean on paper." August was quiet a long moment. "Some men are careful right up until somebody actually checks the paper properly," he said. It was Naomi's own father's logbook that gave her the first solid thread to pull. Working through it one evening while August sat across the table mending a coil of rope, she found a decades-long record of channel soundings, taken faithfully every spring for 26 years, each measurement noted plainly against the date and the water level at the time. "These go back further than any survey Dunlap's office has on file," she said slowly, turning the pages. "Which means whatever unsafe channel report they're planning to cite against me, it can't be built on anything real. My father would have caught a genuine hazard decades before Dunlap's people ever thought to look." August leaned over to study the pages, his expression settling into the particular focus of a man recognizing something he had been hoping to find. "This is exactly the kind of record that could break a case wide open," he said, "if it turns out I'm right about what Pratt and Dunlap have actually been doing." "What case?" Naomi asked. He was quiet again, longer this time, and Naomi watched him weigh something behind his eyes before he finally spoke. "There've been 6 ferry closures along this stretch of territory in the past 2 years, August said. All of them small, independent operations. All of them shut down on unsafe channel findings that nobody's ever produced a proper survey to support. All of them, as it happens, eventually bought out cheap by transport companies with more money than patience." Naomi set down the logbook slowly. "You're not just a deckhand," she said. It was not quite a question. "No," August admitted, "I'm not." "Then who exactly are you?" He met her eyes steadily, setting the old logbook down before he answered, as though what he was about to say required both his hands free. "August Reynolds is my real name," he said. "But I hold a commission from the territorial government to investigate exactly this pattern of fraudulent closures, and I came to Fenwick Landing because your crossing looked likely to be the next one on Pratt's list." Naomi felt something in her chest tighten that was not quite anger and not quite betrayal, though it carried some of both. "You've been watching my operation for weeks and let me think you were nothing more than a hired hand," she said. "While the whole time you already suspected exactly what Pratt was planning to do to me." "I suspected it," August said. "I didn't have proof, not until tonight. I needed to see the crossing operated honestly by somebody who actually knew the river, long enough to understand what an honest operation looks like against whatever fabricated report Dunlap eventually produces. You could have told me from the start." "I could have," August said. "Would you have believed a stranger walking onto your dock claiming to be a territorial commissioner 6 weeks before any of this pressure from Pratt properly showed itself? Or would you have wondered, same as anyone would, exactly what a commissioner wanted with your father's small crossing in the first place?" Naomi did not answer that directly, because she suspected he was right, and being right did not make the 6 weeks of careful silence sting any less. She stood and walked to the window, looking out at the dark river running steady past the landing, and let the quiet stretch between them until she trusted her own voice again. "I need proof this logbook is genuine," she said finally, turning back to him. "Something official enough that Dunlap can't simply dismiss it as a grieving daughter's sentiment." "That I can help with," August said. "Territorial Survey Office keeps its own historical soundings on file in the capital. If your father's measurements match theirs across enough years, nobody can credibly claim the record's been altered or imagined." They spent the following days building the case together, August riding 2 days to the territorial capital to retrieve the survey office's own historical records, while Naomi kept the ferry running and quietly gathered statements from the 6 other operators whose crossings had been shuttered over the past 2 years. Every one of them told a version of the same story: a sudden unsafe channel finding, no survey ever produced on demand, and a generous buyout offer arriving within the month from a transport company connected, however loosely, to Pratt's growing operation. Naomi found in that shared work something she had not expected from a man who had spent 6 weeks letting her believe a smaller truth than the whole of it. August never once tried to manage the investigation without her, bringing every document back to her kitchen table for her own reading, rather than simply informing her of conclusions he had already reached alone. "Your father's soundings match the territorial survey exactly, 3 decades running," August said, laying the capital's records beside her father's logbook one evening. "Which means whatever report Dunlap's about to produce against you will contradict 30 years of independently verified measurement. That's not an opinion anymore, that's proof. And the other 6 ferries? Same pattern, every time," August said. "Once we lay them side by side, No honest board can look at that pattern and call it coincidence. The public permit hearing, when Dunlap finally scheduled it, drew nearly the whole of Fenwick Landing down to the Ferry Landing itself. Curiosity and concern in equal measure over whether the only reliable crossing for 40 miles was truly about to close for good. Dunlap stood at a makeshift table near the dock, Pratt beside him with the particular satisfaction of a man who believed the outcome already settled, and began reading aloud a formal finding that declared the Talbot Channel at Fenwick Landing unsafe for continued passenger crossing. Naomi stepped forward before he had finished, her father's logbook in one hand and the territorial survey records in the other. "Before you close a 26-year crossing on that finding," she said, loud enough to carry across the gathered crowd, "I'd ask you to explain how an unsafe channel managed to match, sounding for sounding, 30 years of records kept by both my father and your own territorial survey office." Dunlap's composure faltered visibly, his eyes flicking toward Pratt as though searching for guidance that did not immediately arrive. "Miss Sutter, a personal logbook hardly constitutes—" "It isn't only my logbook," Naomi said, holding up the second set of pages. "These are your own office's historical soundings, retrieved from the territorial capital this week. Compare them yourself, right here, in front of everyone who's about to lose their only way across this river." The crowd's murmur shifted, curious now rather than merely anxious, and it was into that shifting quiet that August stepped forward from where he had been standing near the ferry rail, exactly where he had stood the morning the closure notice first appeared. "There's something more you should all know before Mr. Dunlap finishes reading that finding," August said, his voice carrying the same even calm it had carried every single morning he'd worked this crossing. He drew a folded paper from his coat, a territorial seal visible plainly across its face. "My name is August Reynolds, and I hold a commission as Territorial River Commissioner, sent here specifically to investigate a pattern of fraudulent, unsafe channel findings used to shut down independent ferry operations across this district." A voice rose from the back of the crowd, one of the territorial clerks who had ridden out with the survey records. "Commissioner Reynolds," the clerk said, plain and immediate, "we weren't told you'd already be on site." The word landed across the gathered crowd with a weight Naomi felt settle into her own chest as much as anyone else's. 6 weeks of quiet mornings on the water, rearranging themselves into a shape she had not fully permitted herself to imagine until that exact moment. Pratt's face had gone pale in the particular way of a man watching a plan collapse faster than he could think to defend it. "This is absurd," Pratt said, though his voice had lost the smooth confidence it carried at the dock 6 weeks before. "A deckhand claiming territorial authority in front of half the county." "Not claiming," August said, "proving." He nodded toward Naomi. "Miss Sutter's father kept 30 years of honest measurement on a river most men would have stopped bothering to track after the first decade. That record, matched against my own office's files, shows exactly what I came here suspecting. 6 ferries shut down on findings that never existed as genuine surveys, each one bought out cheap afterward by companies connected to Mr. Pratt's own transport line." Dunlap's hands were visibly unsteady on the papers before him now. "I was told the channel had been properly assessed," he said, his voice thin. "You never personally checked," August said, not unkindly, though the words carried their own particular weight. "That's precisely the problem this territory has been suffering for 2 years running. Convenient findings nobody bothers to verify, so long as the right man's satisfied with the outcome." The crowd's attention swung fully toward Pratt now, whispered recognition moving through the gathered faces as more than one person began connecting his own hard year to the pattern August had just laid bare. An older woman near the front, whom Naomi recognized as the widow who had run the ferry 2 crossings north before its own sudden closure the previous summer, stepped forward with her chin lifted. "They told me my crossing failed the same unsafe finding," the widow said. "Never showed me a survey either. Bought my rig for a third what my husband put into it, not 4 months later." 2 more voices rose after hers, each one confirming some piece of the same pattern, and within minutes the gathered crowd had assembled, unprompted, a considerably fuller picture of Pratt's scheme than August's careful weeks of investigation alone might have managed to prove so plainly. Dunlap resigned his position within the month, the territorial board moving swiftly once August's formal report reached the capital, and the 6 fraudulent closures were reversed one by one as their original owners were located and offered proper compensation for the crossings they had lost. Pratt's transport company faced a formal inquiry into the acquisitions themselves, and though he was not driven entirely from the territory, his reputation along the Talbot never recovered enough to trouble an honest operator again. The territorial board's final report named every family Pratt's scheme had displaced, restoring not only their permits, but a portion of the profits his company had earned running crossings that were never rightfully his to operate. Amos Kettering told anyone who asked that he'd suspected something crooked about Pratt from the very first week the man arrived in Fenwick Landing with money nobody could quite account for. Naomi's own ferry permit was reinstated within the week, no further inspection required once the territorial board reviewed her father's 30-year record alongside their own files. She kept the crossing running through that whole difficult season and found, once the dust of the hearing settled, that August remained at Fenwick Landing considerably longer than his formal investigation strictly required. "Your work here's finished," she said to him one evening, the two of them sitting on the dock after the last crossing of the day. "Reports filed, Dunlap's gone, Pratt's been properly checked. Reckon a territorial commissioner's got other rivers needing his attention." "Reckon he does," August agreed. "Been putting off writing to the capital about my next assignment for longer than I probably should have." "Why's that?" He was quiet a moment, turning his hat over in his hands the way she had noticed him do when weighing words with unusual care. "Because I came to this crossing 6 weeks ago looking for evidence of fraud," he said, "and found instead a woman who ran her father's river better than most men managed to run anything at all. Wasn't planning on that complicating my report, but it has." Naomi considered that a long moment, the accumulated weight of 6 weeks finally settling into something lighter than the wariness she had carried since learning his true title. "I never needed you to be a commissioner," she said. "I valued you when I thought you were nothing more than a deckhand willing to learn my father's river properly." "I know," August said. "That's precisely why I could finally tell you the rest of it once Pratt's scheme was properly proven. You'd already decided what you thought of me before you knew what I actually held, and that's worth more to me than any commission the territory could hand me." She looked at the brass bell resting on the dock beside her, the same one she had carried out of her father's house every morning since his funeral, and found herself reaching for it now less out of habit than out of some quiet need to hold something solid while she said what she meant to say next. "My father used to ring this bell every evening when the last crossing was done," she said. "Told me once that a good river deserves marking properly, same as a good day's honest work." She lifted the bell and rang it once, clear and bright across the darkening water, and August watched her with an expression that had settled, somewhere in the past weeks, into something considerably warmer than professional respect alone accounted for. "Reckon I could learn to appreciate a river that gets marked properly," he said. "Reckon you'd need to stick around a good while longer to learn it right," Naomi said. "Already written the capital," August admitted. "Told them my current assignment required considerably more time than the fraud investigation alone accounts for." Naomi laughed, real and unguarded, the particular sound that had grown steadily more frequent between them across 6 weeks of shared mornings on the water. "That's a bold claim to put in an official report, Commissioner." "Wasn't lying," August said. "Just hadn't finished explaining the whole of it yet." Old Amos Kettering, passing along the bank with a lantern on his way home from the mercantile, called out a plain good night to them both, and Naomi called back easily, understanding, for the first time in longer than she cared to admit, that Fenwick Landing had settled fully into trusting the crossing again, and trusting the two people now running it together besides. The widow from the northern crossing had already sent word that she meant to rebuild with her own compensation money, and 2 of the other displaced ferry owners had written similarly hopeful letters that Naomi kept folded on her father's old desk alongside the logbook that had started the whole unraveling. They sat together on the dock as the last light left the water, the brass bell resting quiet between them, and Fenwick Landing settled into the particular hush of a river town at evening, its only crossing running honest and steady into whatever season came next.